The party nobody heard, the afternoon looked expensive. The way sunlight polished the Montgomery estate into something you'd see in magazines. Hedges cut like emerald chess pieces. Waiters gliding with silver trays. A string quartet working so hard to sound effortless that no one noticed their fingers shivering in the shade. Laughter was the main decoration, brittle, bright, and placed everywhere at once. And above it all, thin as wire and twice as tense, ran the sound that didn't fit. A child's scream repeating, fraying, pleading. People made a performance of not hearing it. They spoke louder, moved farther from the sound while pretending they weren't. The way adults meticulously ignore a crying baby on an airplane. Except this wasn't a baby, and this wasn't an airplane. It was the heir of the house, 6-year-old Theo Montgomery, strapped into a sleek wheelchair not far from the white stone terrace. The chair looked like something engineered to climb mountains. The boy inside it looked very small. "Don't fuss," Harrison Montgomery told a cluster of donors, smoothing a hand through hair that never misbehaved. "Theo has his episodes. Doctors say it's best not to reward them." His voice turned the scream into a line item. A waiter refreshed champagne. The quartet modulated into something cheerful. Near the catering tent, a girl pressed herself into a slice of shadow and watched with the alertness of someone who has learned to look before she reaches. Lily Carter was 10 and trying not to be hungry in public. Her father fixed the estate's bones, pipes, pumps, sprinklers, and the Montgomerys paid him just enough to keep them in the tiny cottage under the tallest trees. Since her mother's illness, meals had become more like negotiations, but you couldn't negotiate with a stomach at a party where food was for guests. Lily told her stomach to behave and stared at Theo instead. His sound wasn't just sound. It had corners, urgency, rhythm. She couldn't have explained how she knew that. She just felt it land in her body like a message. She broke the rule she'd promised her father she'd keep. Stay invisible, and slid along a row of hedges until she reached the boy. Up close, she saw the tilt of his head, the precise tremor of his right hand, the way his eyes didn't dart or roll but fixed, hard, on a single thing deep in the bright distance. "Hi," she said, voice low so it didn't scare him. "I'm Lily." The scream dropped as if someone pulled its plug. His chest hitched. His hand shook more, rising, insisting, pointing past her, over her shoulder, through her to the shimmer of the pool. "You're showing me," she said. Okay, it wasn't an elegant pool. It was the kind you see in aerial shots, long enough to be a line in a novel, perfect enough to make you suspect it had been regrouted yesterday, sunlight scattered on it like coins. Just below the far lip, the water wasn't right. The blue was broken by a soft shock of yellow. A dress. A little girl face down, her hair floating like an idea not yet finished. Lily didn't think. She made a sound that ripped past the quartet and the clink of glass and the curated chatter. "Help, the pool!" There's a child in the pool. Silence, then screams that were finally allowed. Shoes slapping stone, a splash that cut into the day like a knife. Harrison Montgomery, perfectly ordinary in that single second, hit the water without removing his shoes. When he rose, he held the small body high, streaming, lifeless. The yellow dress clung to him as if it wanted to keep its secret. "Move," a woman said, fierce and fast. Elegant silk turned irrelevant as she knelt and began chest compressions. Someone called 911. Someone began to pray. Someone tried to keep the other children from seeing. Lily stood on the edge of it all, hands bloodless with gripping themselves, and realized she was looking for Theo's face. He had stopped screaming. Tears salted his cheeks. He watched not the dying, but Lily watched her watching everyone else, and she understood in a way that was beyond words. He had been trying to hand that moment to a world that refused to take it. The little girl coughed. The sound was terrible, then miraculous, then the only sound anyone wanted. Water poured out. Color rushed in. She cried, thin and furious at the indignity of air returning. The doctor, who had been a woman in silk, rocked back on her heels, shaking. Harrison made an animal noise, half laugh, half sob. Elizabeth Montgomery, mother, hostess, perfection sculpted into a person, reached for her daughter with hands that trembled, mascara writing maps on her cheeks. Sirens arrived like punctuation. The toddler disappeared into an ambulance under the soft authority of professionals. The party dissolved. The quartet's last chord hung embarrassed in the air and then died. Who saw? Someone asked in the general panic. No one answered. No one thought to say, the boy did. Lily felt her father's hand land on her shoulder, firm and urgent. "Lils, what did you do?" She told him. She didn't say she had been hungry. She didn't say that hunger had led her to the buffet, which had led her to the scream, which had led her to the boy, which had led her to a pool that would have been calm all afternoon if no one had listened. She told him. He was pointing. He wouldn't stop. He was showing me where to look. Her father's face did something complicated that Lily would later understand was pride fighting fear. "You did right," he said. "Stay with me." But the house had already noticed them. Not the house made of stone and money. The house made of people whose attention could feel like weather. A housekeeper with a clipboard approached like a messenger from a king. "Mr. Montgomery would like to see you," she said to Lily, which was like the moon inviting a match to a meeting. Harrison's study smelled like leather that had never been allowed to be tired. The desk was too big for honesty. He didn't sit behind it. He stood near the window as if he needed light for this. Without the wet clothes and the adrenaline, he looked like a man who had been taught that control is the same thing as love. "Tell me," he said, and Lily did, careful and clear. She showed him Theo's pointing hand with her own, her arm trembling as if it had borrowed the boy's tremor. She told him about the feeling, that the scream wasn't random, that it had edges, that it wanted to become language. "You could tell the difference," he said, not as a skeptic, but as if he were asking for permission to believe it. "My mom used to work with kids who couldn't use words," Lily said. Her mom had died in winter, but saying "used to" felt less like breaking a thing. She said everybody talks. Some people talk through noise or eyes or patterns. You just have to figure out the channel. Harrison's expression collapsed in on itself, then rebuilt with care. "Emily is stable," he said, and Lily's knees went weak with relief. "They're keeping her overnight." He looked past Lily toward a family photograph, the kind that wants to be timeless, and then to the door, where Elizabeth stood as if chosen by a spotlight. She had changed into dry clothes. Her beauty looked like something heavy to lift. "This is Lily," Harrison said, as if introducing a colleague, not a child. "She found Emily." Elizabeth crossed the room in 3 steps and took Lily's hands with the hunger of a person who has just realized gratitude is a physical need. "Thank you," she said, and the words sounded less like etiquette and more like the first honest thing she'd said all day. "It was Theo," Lily answered. He showed me." Silence placed itself in the middle of the room. Elizabeth let go of Lily's hands and held her own as if she needed proof they could still do good. "The doctors say—" "The doctors have been wrong before," Harrison said, eyes on the photo again. And Lily saw it. The first crack in a wall so well painted the family had mistaken it for part of the house. They didn't send Lily away. They didn't send her home. They asked her to come back, not to carry trays or fetch tools, but to sit with the boy in the chair and see if the scream could become a sentence. Harrison wrapped the ask in money because that was the language he trusted. But the ask itself was more fragile than any dollar. He was asking her to be the kind of person she already was. Her father didn't like it. Resistance leveled his voice. "She's a child," he said. "She's not a therapist." "She's the first person who listened," Harrison said. And to his credit, the words didn't vibrate with the humiliation of a man who had just been out-listened by a 10-year-old. They vibrated with something like hope. Hope can make meals taste like more than they are. That night in the cottage, Lily ate soup that was mostly water and didn't mind, because tomorrow had suddenly grown into something big enough to climb. Her father showed her how to be wary without being small. "They live on a cliff of reputation," he said. "People do strange things to keep from falling. What if Theo is smarter than they think?" Lily said, "What if he is?" Her father answered, and Lily realized he wasn't worried about whether the boy could speak. He was worried about what the house would do with the knowledge if he could. The next afternoon, Nurse Jolene met Lily at a side door and poured a list of rules into her like cold tea. "We keep to routine," she said, as if routine were a religion. "We do not excite him. We do not promise what cannot be delivered. We avoid fatigue, frustration, loud noises, sudden movements. What about listening?" Lily asked. "That goes without saying," the nurse said, which is what people say when it has never actually been practiced. Theo's room had been photo-styled into a child's hospital suite, immaculate, sterile, and wildly respectful of equipment. Toys sat on shelves like sculptures. A single framed picture of the family faced the bed like a reminder of what rooms like this were for. Keeping the idea of family intact while the details negotiated with reality. He was watching the window when they entered. tracking not the view but the light itself as if he liked to see how it admitted time. His eyes found Lily and didn't leave. He made a sound that Nurse Jolene immediately labeled. Agitated? He's often agitated at this hour. Or talking, Lily said softly, already moving to sit where he could see her without tilting his neck. Hi Theo, it's me again. Their first conversation was not miraculous. It was work, slow, respectful, improvised. Lily tried the simplest thing. A red pencil in his hand, her hand under his wrist to quiet the tremor slightly. A blank page and a rule they could both remember. Line for yes, she said. Dot for no. Any mark at all counts. The line came out shaky as a baby deer, but it was a line. The dot was fainter. More of a press than a point, but it was a difference. They practiced until sweat threaded his hair and his breathing told the truth of effort. She asked him questions that a stranger could not have answered by guessing. Do you like it when the window is open? Line. Do you like the violin more than the piano? Long pause, then dot. Does your chair hurt your back? Line, an invention on the spot, until the nurse scolded gently that they hadn't agreed on multiple lines. 2 lines for important, Lily said, and Theo looked at her. The way people look at a door they didn't know was there. She introduced a third signal, 3 quick taps of his index finger on the chair's arm for stop. And after he used it once, not to stop the questions but to stop the nurse's running commentary, Jolene left the room and pretended it was to fetch water. When she returned, her clipboard had transformed from shield to invitation. Elizabeth watched the last 15 minutes from the doorway, her face a study in emotions that didn't want to be seen together. When Lily finally looked up, the woman had tears but didn't look undone by them. She looked organized by them as if sorrow had become a method. I heard him laugh, Elizabeth said, voice thin with disbelief. He did, Lily said. It just sounds different. That night at a long table where money learned to pass for family, Harrison set down his fork and said into the echoing air, What if we've been wrong about our son? No one answered. The silence wasn't consent, but it wasn't dissent anymore either. The next days stitched themselves into a pattern. Lily arrived with a small backpack of contraband, a beaten-up library copy of Matilda, a stack of thick paper, a laminated sheet she made on the cottage table with her father's leftover contact paper, a crude communication board of pictures and words that smiled apologetically for not being professional. She set the board where Theo could see it. She matched her breath to his, then her timing to his effort. She treated each yes like a sentence and each no like a plot twist. Theo learned the board like a pianist finds scales he's always known. He chose read so often that the nurse began to schedule the day around story hours. He chose music, and the quartet's cellist appeared in the doorway as if conjured, then stayed for 20 minutes and played Bach low and gentle and true. And Theo cried without distress because crying turned out to mean many things. Harrison began to visit in the late afternoons. Different from the man who ran companies, he came to watch his son work. Elizabeth came too, but she brought something else, a refusal to look away from the part where shame was supposed to live. She let it live and didn't let it drive. On Friday, Lily placed a tablet on the tray and opened a basic typing app. Want to try? She asked, as if this were a game, because games are less frightening than thresholds. Theo looked at the keyboard as if it were a forest and then took one careful step. His finger drifted, hovered, landed on H, slipped, hit J, backed up. Nurse Jolene opened her mouth to correct and then shut it because Lily shook her head once without looking up. After 7 minutes, that felt like holding their breath. The tablet spoke with a flat voice that didn't know it was delivering a miracle. Hello. The sound wasn't lovely, but the word was. Elizabeth made the kind of noise mothers make when their bodies remember giving birth. Harrison closed his eyes. Theo's face did not change like a movie face. He didn't grin or gasp. He exhaled in a tiny, controlled victory and then looked at Lily because she had always looked at him. Hi, Lily said back. I'm Lily. He blinked, deliberate, and pointed again. Not at the pool this time, but at the board where she had drawn a little house with a window full of stars. More, the tablet said, and the nurse forgot her rules and clapped. That night the estate was quieter than usual, as if the walls were listening to see if this would last. In the cottage, Lily's father wrapped his big hands around a mug and around his worry. You're doing something holy, he said, and Lily pretended she didn't want to cry because holy was a word people saved for buildings they couldn't afford. Across the lawn, in the big house that sometimes didn't feel like a home, Harrison stood in Theo's doorway and watched his son sleep. Elizabeth slipped her hand into his. They didn't talk about the cameras that would eventually come, or the board members who would want statements, or the old doctor who would not go quietly. They stood there and did the thing that turns mansions into homes. They listened. Outside, the pool held the sky and gave it back. Inside, a tablet lay on a charger as if rest were also a task. And in the narrow hallway between rich and poor, old and new, silence and speech, a girl who had been hungry at a party slept with the stubborn sense that she had just stepped into her real life. A language without words morning arrived like a soft rehearsal of hope, a pale light testing the edges of the east wing before daring to enter fully, and by the time Lily stepped through the side door with her backpack thumped solid against her shoulders, the house already felt different in the way rooms do after someone has told the truth inside them. Nurse Jolene met her with a clipboard and the thin smile of a person who trusts rules more than outcomes, reciting vitals and schedules and approved activities as if reading from a script she'd written herself. And Lily nodded because politeness was its own kind of tool. But as soon as the door to Theo's room whispered shut, the world shrank to the boy in the chair, the tablet charging in its cradle, the homemade board with its cheerfully clumsy drawings, and the small, ferocious intention that hung between them like a bridge they built one plank at a time. Theo watched her with that steady, not staring way of his, eyes a quiet blue that didn't beg for attention so much as reward it, and when she said good morning, he answered by finding the red pencil, by letting her guide his wrist until the line came, wobbly but decisive, and then another when she asked if he wanted the window open, and then a dot when she suggested violin over piano. And it was nothing and everything at once because the code was theirs, made in the space between their patience and his effort, proof that language doesn't need permission to exist. They fell into a rhythm that looked simple but ate strength like fire, each question a little hill, each answer a climb, and when fatigue pushed color from Theo's face, Lily broke the work with story, easing back into Matilda with the kind of voice that lets ink turn into air, pausing to ask what he thought of adults who mistake volume for wisdom, smiling when he dragged his finger to more and then to the tiny lightning bolt she'd sketched for brave. And somewhere in the middle of a chapter about a chalkboard and a classroom revolt, they invented laughing together. Not the neat laughter of parties, but the breathless, unphotogenic kind that jolted his muscles and made the nurse peek in with alarm until she realized joy registered like distress until you learned the person's dictionary. Afterward, his fingers trembled with the cost of it, and she held a cup with a straw so he could drink water in return, heart rate settling to the alphabet they were teaching to bend. Resistance, when it came, did not stomp. It flowed quiet and credentialed, wearing a stethoscope and a certainty that had become its own addiction, and Dr. Blackwell impeccably pressed, expensively late, accustomed to rooms shaping themselves around his opinions, listened to a summary of the previous day's breakthroughs, with the indulgent tilt of a man hearing about a child's excellent drawing of a house with smoke always going the right way, and then he spoke gently, the way people do when they've already decided kindness is a synonym for dismissal, saying that episodes of pseudo-communication often followed stressful events, that families in shock found patterns where there were only sympathetic spasms, that expectations were dangerous and hope, unmanaged, could be cruel. Lily stood near the window with both hands in the straps of her backpack so she wouldn't say something that would make her father's job more precarious than a ladder in wind. But when Dr. Blackwell shifted his attention to Theo and, without looking directly at him, told the nurse to reduce stimulation lest the child become agitated, the air itself pushed Lily forward politely at first. Would you like to see what he can do? And then, when the doctor's smile confessed he would prefer not to, with the stubborn composure she'd inherited from a woman who had smiled through pain until she could lay it down, she set the tablet within range, not touching Theo's arm because dignity was also a tool, and she asked him a question only he and she could answer, a nothing question that lived in something ordinary. What was the first word we ever typed, do you remember? And after a long breath and a small war fought in his forearm, he found H and then E and then L and L and O, and the device spoke the flat, beautiful syllables into the polished room. And a minute later, because defiance needs joy to be complete, he added again, and it was petty to take pleasure in the way the doctor's face reset itself, as if someone had pulled the batteries. But Lily took it anyway because sometimes justice wears small clothes. Dr. Blackwell recovered with professionalism. He always would. offering alternative explanations and scheduling a more comprehensive evaluation for a future he assumed would arrive with the quiet efficiency of a hospital corridor. And Harrison thanked him with the complicated grace of a man who had written checks large enough to expect deference and was learning, badly but sincerely, how to exchange deference for accuracy. And when the doctor left, the house exhaled, a sound with the shape of a plan forming. Change seldom begins where it can be photographed. It starts in arrangements in who is CC'd in the tone of an email. And that afternoon Harrison made 2 calls. The first to a colleague who owed him honesty, the second to Dr. Aditi Sharma, whose reputation traveled not on magazine profiles but in parents' group chats like a blessing someone was willing to say out loud. She arrived 2 days later wearing flats and a cardigan that didn't apologize for anything, and she opened with a question to Theo, not about his pain but about his preferences. "Do you like morning sessions better or afternoon?" And waited unhurried while he moved through his answer. And then she turned to the nurse and the parents and Lily and explained, as if she were reading instructions everyone had misplaced, that presumed competence was not a slogan, but an operating principle, the baseline from which you design tools that the body's refusal to obey did not indict the mind, that tests built around speed or fine motor skill would always lie about the person they were meant to serve. She swapped the finger-tapping keyboard for an eye-tracking rig that looked like a passenger in front of the tablet, and coached Theo through the strange new intimacy of steering letters with his gaze, praising calibration like a game worth winning. And the first time he wrote his name without help, Harrison closed his eyes like a man trying not to break, and Elizabeth said the word son as if it had just become plural. The house rearranged itself around the work in 100 quiet ways that together felt like a parade. Rugs rolled to ease chair movement, thresholds shaved, a laughing contractor installing a sliding mount at Theo's favorite window so the screen could follow his line of sight. Books arriving in a healthy, undignified riot from the public library and a private one downtown that had rarely been asked for magic of this kind. And the east bedroom, once a choreography of monitors and tubing, acquired warmth like a muscle memory. Walls layered in galaxies that caught night and threw it back friendly. A projector aimed at the ceiling for tired days, shelves at the correct height for choosing, not just displaying, and a soft beanbag tucked into a corner where Elizabeth discovered, to her astonishment and then her daily practice, that reading to a child is a way of saying I see the you who is not your chart. Staff learned new routes through the day. The cook began making the kind of ice that crunches exactly right because Theo liked the sound, and Lily swore it helped her read lines funnier. Jolene, who had watched entire philosophies rise and fall across children's beds, traded her clipboard for a small notebook full of Theo's jokes because he had jokes, dry little darts that didn't need delivery to find their mark. And once, when Harrison forgot himself and answered a question about Theo instead of to him, the boy spelled rude and fine, and everyone laughed except Harrison, who didn't, because he was learning a long lesson and it hurt in a way he understood he deserved. But resistance rarely leaves. It mutates. And while Dr. Sharma built a scaffolding of skill and trust, the old system sent out the last of its antibodies, minor sabotage that pretended to be caution, a device unplugged by accident so many mornings the battery percentage began to look like a threat, a door left half open so a private struggle could be overheard and narrated as failure, a whispered suggestion in the hallway that perhaps the girl was coaching responses, and when confronted, each incident collapsed into apology so shapely it could have been framed. Yet they kept coming, and Lily began walking the corridor like a human alarm, checking cables, clearing thresholds, becoming, without meaning to, the thin layer between Theo and the world's laziness. The worst moment came on a Thursday that had started generous and clouded over toward noon, when Jolene, perhaps tired, perhaps out of patience with a family that had voted to be reborn, told Theo, lightly, that a residential program might be more restful for everyone, and his body flooded with a panic so total the tablet captured nothing but no and no, and no until Lily arrived and held his hand with both of hers and said his name over and over as if he were a diver coming up too. Asked, and Dr. Sharma heard about it, and Harrison heard about it from Dr. Sharma, and the hallway heard Harrison fire Jolene in a voice that wasn't cruel, but didn't leave her standing. And the next morning Jason arrived, young and strong and blessedly modest, and became the kind of helper who remembers that help is not a spotlight, but a hallway light that turns on exactly when you need it. Trust is a thing you don't notice growing until it becomes shade. And inside its cover, Theo began to ask for more of his life. Not in grand gestures, but in precise expansions that told the adults where their imaginations had ended. Could we eat in the dining room with everyone on Friday just to try it? And Harrison paused at the doorway like a boy outside a treehouse and then said yes, and the table learned to wait for the voice that came when the device was ready. And if conversations tilted toward patience some nights, they also tilted toward inclusion, which tasted new. And Emily, the small rescuer rescued, took to sitting on her brother's footplate during dessert, until Elizabeth explained gently that while love could be everywhere, toes could not. Theo wanted music that wasn't curated. He wanted to choose what came through the speakers, and when Lily gave him a handful of playlists and he skipped everything classical to land on a scratchy live recording with audience noise and a singer who didn't apologize for his rasp, she laughed and wrote taste with an arrow to his name, and he answered with yours okay. And if the flirtation of friendship could be said to have a language, this was part of it. On the second Saturday of this new life, Harrison stood by the garage in shirt sleeves like an ordinary father and watched two men load a treadmill and a monstrous machine with straps onto a truck headed for donation. And a neighbor out walking a dog stopped to gawk and then to ask, gentle as gossip, whether the Montgomery boy was worse, and Harrison surprised himself by saying evenly, he is who he has always been. We finally started catching up. And after the neighbor left, he leaned against the cool stone and let the words wash him clean and sting him raw. Both things true at once. Elizabeth found him there and didn't offer comfort. She offered participation, a schedule she'd drafted with Lily and Dr. Sharma that redistributed the weight of care across love and labor, putting Lily's after-school hours in ink, setting aside an everyday slice just for mother and son reading that didn't feel like therapy, because it wasn't. A promise by Harrison to ask Theo before major decisions were announced. An elegant surrender of control dressed as logistics. At school, word about Lily's job had traveled along the gold-plated grapevine and returned to her ears wrapped in commentary. Scholarship girl turned savior, charity pet, professional pity volunteer, the sound of all of it so steady that some days she walked the halls feeling like a documentary subject instead of a person. But the work after school was a solvent against rumors, and when it wasn't, Theo was. Lancing her doubts with dry precision. Do they write your tests? Do they write our jokes? Then they don't get a vote. And sometimes she laughed, and sometimes she cried, and sometimes she made lists in her notebook with 2 columns labeled noise and signal, teaching herself to sort a world that wanted to be sorted for her. The headmistress called her in one Wednesday with tea and a question about how the school might be useful, beyond not being harmful. And Lily surprised them both by asking for a small room with a printer and too many outlets so she could prep materials before driving to the estate, and of course turned into a key, and the school became a little bit more like a place for her and not just a place she passed through on the way to her real day. The first time Theo used his new voice to disagree with a doctor in public felt like watching a window open in a room that everyone had sworn shut, a minor conference in a glossy hotel where Elizabeth had worn her careful strength, and Harrison had prepared to entertain skepticism with a jaw that still liked to clench, and Dr. Sharma sat on a panel and told the story plainly, the misdiagnosis, the assumptions, the recalibration. And then she turned to the chair beside her and invited Theo to answer a question about fatiguing tasks, and a neurologist with a reputation, like a winter coat asked with clinical politeness, how one could be certain the responses weren't simply echoes of caregivers' desires. And Theo listened without flinching, because no one had taught him to flinch from ideas, only from touch, and then spelled ask a question they don't want, which made the audience laugh because humor is the solvent of tension. And then he added like, do I want more therapy? And the laughter turned into a kind of leaning forward that meant he had them, and he was gentle with them, answering in specifics about error rates and calibration breaks and the way his eyes felt when the track went off. And when it was over, the neurologist came up not to apologize but to thank, which was better, because gratitude is what grows into changed practice while apologies just mend yesterday. By winter, the east bedroom belonged less to a diagnosis than to a life, evidence of an actual child everywhere, stickers acquired by Emily and applied liberally to inappropriate surfaces, a small constellation of popcorn kernels under the projector, beanbag, a lopsided paper crown from a board game victory that Jason swore was due to Theo's ruthless probability sense. And yet the transformation was not an Instagram arc polished by filters. It was messy and tiring and real. There were days the device glitched and the house felt cursed by tiny gods who loved irony. Days when effort bought little. Days when Lily's patience frayed and she hated herself for it. Days when Harrison erupted at a vendor and then had to kneel by his son's chair and say the adult version of "I'm sorry," which is "I'm learning and it's late but I'm not stopping." There were also days when Theo's sentences unspooled with a speed that felt like a time-lapse of ivy crossing brick. Days when Elizabeth read a chapter and he wrote again, and she read it twice and then cried because being asked for more by "Your child is a sacrament in any language." Days when Lily got a math problem wrong and Theo got it right and she groaned theatrically and accused him of betrayal, and he wrote tutoring fee and drew a wobbly $sign until they were both laughing. Too hard to stand. And then one evening, the rain practicing at the windows, Lily arrived to find the family eating together early at the long table that had always intimidated sound, and there was a place set for her with a napkin folded like a small argument, and a plate that made the soup look grand, and Harrison looked like a man working at humility one brick at a time, and Elizabeth radiated a kind of ordinary ease that had been an endangered species in that house, and Theo, positioned so he could see and be seen without strain, wrote speech next, and they all turned toward him because that phrase had acquired meaning beyond its syllables, and he continued, "Want to speak somewhere? Big tell them not to assume, tell them to build ramps for mines," and the idea landed scary and right, and Dr. Sharma, who had joined them because lines had blurred in the best way, said there was a conference in Boston where people came to be changed, and Harrison opened his mouth to say no because protection still spoke first in him, and Elizabeth put a hand on his sleeve and said softly, "Let him finish." And Theo did. "I have been here the whole time. I would like to meet the world." And in the silence that followed, a new agreement formed, fragile and luminous and exacting, the kind that doesn't survive without work, the kind that changes not just one boy's care plan but the climate inside a powerful house. That night, Lily walked back to the guest parking under a sky that had scrubbed itself clean, the chill cutting pretty patterns in her breath, and she thought about how language had arrived in Theo's life, not like a parade, but like plumbing, hidden, vital, carrying what needed carrying, and she understood something her mother had tried to teach in simpler terms. That dignity is not an accessory you put on once you've proven yourself. It is the ground you stand on while you learn to be seen. She texted her father a picture of the paper crown, and he replied with a heart and a question about dinner. And she realized that for all the glitter and consequence of the big house, the small things still made the day round. Socks drying on a radiator, soup that tasted like somebody had remembered you, the knowledge that tomorrow would be hard in precisely mapped ways and still worth doing. Behind her, in the window of the east wing, a rectangle of light held steady. In front of her, the drive curved toward the gate like an invitation, and in the pocket of her coat, the tablet's faint, intermittent buzz felt like a heartbeat that had learned at last how to answer back. New rooms, old walls. The first days of autumn settled over the Montgomery estate with a kind of tentative grace. The air lighter, the gardens less vain, the sky brushing the roof with cooler hands, and in that hush between seasons, a new life began to take shape for both the boy who had found his voice and the girl who had found her purpose. Lily Carter, who only a few months ago had slipped through the shadows of a millionaire's party to steal a few leftovers, now walked up the grand steps each morning, not as an intruder, but as someone expected, her name written on the staff board in a firm, neat script. Yet expectation, even when kindly meant, is a weight, and Lily felt its presence in every polished corner of the mansion, in the way the housekeepers smiled too warmly, in the way Harrison Montgomery's business associates now nodded at her, as though she were part of some grand miracle they were trying to understand. For Theo, the transformation was more profound, but it was also exhausting. His mind, long locked in a body that refused to obey, now had a channel, a fragile bridge of technology and patience through which his thoughts could finally cross. Each morning began with his communication tablet freshly calibrated by Jason, the new aide whose easygoing manner made the technology seem almost natural. Under the quiet supervision of Dr. Aditi Sharma, Theo's sessions were now less about proving what he could do and more about learning to live with it, writing stories, answering questions, asking his own, and shaping his world in sentences that carried both humor and insight. But the outside world, ever hungry for novelty, had begun to stir. Word had spread about the Montgomery boy who woke up, as one newspaper crudely phrased it, and the house soon found itself besieged by inquiries. Some came from journalists, others from researchers, and many from parents desperate for hope. Harrison turned them all away with the protective ferocity of a man who had learned too late how much he'd failed his son, while Elizabeth, caught between pride and guilt, spent her afternoons drafting careful replies that always began with, "Thank you for your concern." Lily, meanwhile, had started a new chapter of her own. True to his promise, Harrison had arranged a full scholarship for her at Greenwich Academy, an institution so prestigious that its very hallways smelled like legacy. On her first day, she stood at the school's gates feeling like a counterfeit coin among gold. Her second-hand shoes polished until they almost shone, her uniform altered at the cottage sewing machine, and her heart divided between gratitude and apprehension. Inside, the world seemed cleaner, quieter, and infinitely more expensive. The classrooms were bright with glass and confidence. The teachers spoke with the slow certainty of people unaccustomed to being questioned, and the students moved in small, self-contained flocks, their laughter just loud enough to exclude. At lunch, Lily sat alone at the far end of a long table, eating slowly, acutely aware of the eyes that darted her way. She heard whispers, charity case, Montgomery girl, scholarship project, but she pretended not to notice. What kept her steady was the thought of Theo waiting at the estate each afternoon, of the smile that spread across his face whenever she entered the room, of the way he always typed, "You came," as if it were the best news of his day. Her father tried to hide his worry behind work. The cottage, still under repair from the summer floods, meant they were living in the east guest suite of the mansion, a temporary arrangement that felt both luxurious and wrong. Tom Carter kept busy maintaining the grounds, fixing irrigation lines, trimming the hedges, and trying not to feel like an intruder in the very property he tended. At night, over simple dinners in the guest suite's tiny kitchenette, he and Lily spoke about her classes, about Theo, and about the strange new rhythm of their lives. "Remember, sweetheart," he'd say gently, "no matter how big this house is, it's not ours. Don't let it own you." And Lily would nod, though she didn't have the heart to tell him that part of her already belonged to it. Not the marble floors or chandeliers, but to the quiet corner room where Theo waited every day with questions the world had never let him ask. One Thursday afternoon, after a particularly long day of classes, Lily arrived to find Theo already at his desk, the eye-tracking device glowing softly. His mother was sitting nearby, a book open in her lap, but unread. When Lily entered, Theo's eyes flicked toward her tablet and the mechanical voice broke the silence. "You look tired." "School is a lot," she admitted, dropping her bag by the door. "Too many people who talk like they already know everything, like old doctors." Theo typed, and Lily burst out laughing. "Exactly like that," she said. Over the next hour, they worked through his new writing exercises, short reflections Dr. Sharma had suggested to strengthen his communication. One prompt read, "Describe something you want that money can't buy." Theo's eyes hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before the words appeared, one slow letter at a time. Time before people decided who I was. Lily stared at the screen, her throat tight. "That's beautiful," she whispered, and Theo's device replied, "Not beautiful." True, that night she couldn't stop thinking about the sentence. It haunted her through homework, through dinner, through the quiet when her father fell asleep in his chair. Time before people decided who I was, she thought about how at school, every glance decided her, every whisper wrote her story for her before she'd spoken a word, and she wondered if that was the real thread between her and Theo. Not pity, not charity, but the shared burden of being defined by others' eyes. But the world outside their fragile circle wasn't ready to stop judging. At Greenwich Academy, the gossip grew teeth. Some students were curious in a way that wasn't cruel, but others, the ones whose parents donated entire wings to hospitals, saw her as a curiosity. One girl in particular, Madison Pearson, daughter of the man who managed several Montgomery properties, made it her sport to remind Lily of her place. "Nice dress," Madison would say in the hallway, her smile sharpened to a blade. "Did Mrs. Montgomery pick it for you?" And when Lily ignored her, Madison would lean closer. "You know, my dad says your father was about to lose his job before you started playing therapist with the poor paralyzed boy. Guess you really saved the family, huh?" Lily would walk away, but the words stuck like burrs, digging deeper the more she tried to brush them off. That evening, during their session, she couldn't hide her distraction. Theo noticed immediately. "Something wrong?" his device asked. "It's nothing," she said too quickly. "Lie," he typed, the word short, direct, unarguable. Lily sighed. "It's just school stuff. People talking. About you or me?" "Both, I think." Theo's gaze didn't waver as the next words appeared. "They don't know us." "No," Lily said softly. "They don't." But later that week, Madison's taunts took a crueler turn. During a weekend party at another student's mansion, fueled by gossip and the easy arrogance of privilege, Madison cornered Lily in front of a group of laughing classmates. "So tell me," she said sweetly, "is it true you taught the Montgomery kid to talk? Or did his parents just need a reason to keep your dad from being fired?" Lily froze, her face hot, her heart stumbling in her chest. "That's not true," she said, "isn't it? My dad says Mr. Montgomery was replacing the entire maintenance crew until, what do you know, you suddenly became a miracle worker. What a coincidence." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. It filled the spaces inside Lily that had taken months to build. Without a word, she turned and walked away, the sound of their amusement trailing behind her like smoke. She left the party without saying goodbye to anyone, her phone trembling in her hand as she texted her father. "Was it true? Were you going to lose your job before I started working for them?" The reply came minutes later. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Let's talk when you get home." The words didn't soothe her. They confirmed everything. She didn't go home. Instead, she took the late bus to the Montgomery estate, the streetlights flickering over her reflection in the window, tired, angry, and afraid. By the time she reached the gates, the night was deep and silent, and she half expected the guards to turn her away. But they didn't. They knew her face. She found Harrison in the study, reading reports, his glasses low on his nose. "Lily," he said, startled. "It's nearly midnight." "What's happened?" "I need to see Theo," she said simply, her voice shaking. "Please." A few minutes later, she was in Theo's room, the faint light from the aquarium painting his walls blue. He was awake, as if he'd been waiting for her. When she told him what Madison had said, his face darkened. His fingers moved with a steadiness that surprised her. "She's lying, is she?" Lily whispered. "Was my dad really going to be fired?" Theo hesitated before typing, "Father was angry with your father. Said he was replaceable." Then Emily almost drowned. "After that, he changed." "So it's true," Lily said, her voice small. "All of this, all of you, because of pity." "No," Theo typed, his movements sharper now. "Because of seeing," Lily blinked. "Seeing? You saw me first. Before them. Before anyone. That is not pity. That is truth." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Tears blurred the aquarium light into stars. "Test me if you doubt," Theo added. "Ask anything," so she did. At first, simple things, the color of her backpack, the first word they ever wrote, the story they'd read together. Then harder ones, questions from her schoolwork, abstract puzzles, things he'd never been taught. Theo answered each one with precision that left no room for coincidence. When he solved an algebra problem from her advanced class faster than she could, she laughed through tears. "I'm sorry I doubted you," she said. The screen glowed again. "You're allowed to doubt. Just don't stop believing afterward." That night when Lily finally left, she felt both lighter and heavier, the weight of truth pressing down, but the weight of shame gone. She knew now that what they had built wasn't charity, wasn't circumstance. It was connection. Yet doubt has a way of echoing, and its reverberations reached further than she expected. The next morning, Dr. Sharma called Harrison and Elizabeth into her office with grave eyes. She had uncovered something troubling. Nurse Jolene, who had left months earlier, had been spreading rumors to colleagues and journalists, claiming that Theo's progress was fabricated, that Lily had been coaching him. The story was already picking up traction online. Harrison was livid. "She's trying to discredit my son," he thundered. "She's trying to defend her pride," Dr. Sharma corrected gently. But truth will outlast her. Elizabeth sat silent, twisting her wedding ring. Lily, standing in the corner, wanted to sink into the floor. It wasn't just Theo's reputation at stake, it was hers. Everything they'd built could collapse under a single headline. That evening, when Lily went to see Theo, he was quieter than usual, his sentences shorter, his eyes unfocused. She sat beside him, reading aloud from their latest book. But he interrupted with a single word. "Afraid. Of what?" she asked softly. "That they'll stop believing again." Lily reached for his hand. "Then we'll make them believe," she said. "Again and again, until there's no doubt left to destroy." Over the following weeks, Dr. Sharma worked tirelessly to document Theo's progress in irrefutable detail, recording sessions, analyzing data, inviting specialists to observe. Each new visitor arrived with skepticism and left in awe. One renowned neurologist, after an hour with Theo, turned to Harrison and said quietly, "You realize, don't you, that this changes everything?" By December, the noise of disbelief had begun to fade, replaced by a murmur of respect. Invitations poured in from conferences, universities, advocacy groups. Dr. Sharma chose carefully, but one stood out: the Boston Medical Symposium, a gathering of the nation's leading pediatric neurologists. They wanted Theo to speak, to tell his story in his own words. Harrison hesitated, fearing exploitation. But Theo's response was immediate and unwavering. "I want to be heard," and Lily, sitting beside him, felt the certainty of that desire settle deep in her bones. This was no longer about miracles or charity. It was about justice, the quiet kind, the kind that happens when the world finally listens to the person it had silenced. As winter crept closer, the mansion filled with the hum of preparation, technicians testing microphones, Dr. Sharma perfecting presentation slides, Elizabeth choosing a tie for Theo that matched his eyes. The air was alive with anticipation, the kind that carries both fear and faith. The night before the conference, Lily visited Theo one last time. He was sitting by the window watching the snowfall, his face lit by the faint blue glow of his tablet. When she sat down, the words appeared slowly. "Tomorrow they see what you already knew." Lily smiled through a lump in her throat. "They'll see you," she said. Theo's eyes met hers. "Both," he typed. "Because you listened." Outside, snow fell softly over the silent estate, covering the scars of summer, the pool, the hedges, the footprints of old pain. And for the first time in months, the night felt still, waiting, as if it too was holding its breath for what the morning would bring. The microphone. The morning of the Boston Medical Symposium broke clear and cold, sunlight falling sharp across the harbor like it had been polished overnight for the occasion, and for once the wind carried more anticipation than chill. Inside the vast glass and steel conference center, hundreds of doctors, therapists, engineers, and journalists wove through corridors lined with banners that promised innovation, neuroscience, and future breakthroughs. For the Montgomery family, this was no ordinary gathering. It was Judgment Day, Validation Day, Redemption Day, depending on whom you asked. For Theo, it was simply the first day he would speak to the world with his own voice. Backstage, the air was dense with technical chatter, microphones being tested, cables snaking like nerves, assistants whispering cues. Harrison stood near the curtain, impeccably dressed yet visibly nervous, his posture trying to disguise the tremor in his hands. Elizabeth hovered beside Theo's wheelchair, fussing with his collar, smoothing non-existent wrinkles in his shirt. Dr. Sharma checked the calibration on the communication device one last time, her face calm but her voice betraying its own thrum of energy. Lily sat cross-legged on the carpet beside Theo, her notebook open, reading softly through the speech they had practiced for weeks, though she knew every word by heart. Theo's eyes followed hers on the page. His device clicked quietly as he typed. "Nervous? Terrified," she whispered back. "You?" "Yes, but also ready." When the stage manager's voice called their names, the group moved as one, the kind of synchronized motion that comes from months of shared labor and sleepless hope. The auditorium was larger than Theo had imagined, its semicircular tiers packed with faces that glinted under the lights. Cameras lined the back walls. Somewhere among the rows, Lily could make out journalists she'd only ever seen on television. Dr. Sharma opened with the practiced precision of a scientist and the quiet conviction of a believer. She spoke about assistive communication technology, about the concept of presumed competence, and about the dangers of mistaking silence for ignorance. Her words built a scaffold, and when she finally said, "Today, you'll hear directly from someone the system once decided could not think," the room stilled in collective breath. Theo's chair glided forward. His tablet, now projected onto the giant screen behind him, displayed his words in real time as the mechanical voice spoke them aloud. "My name is Theo Montgomery. I was born with cerebral palsy. For years, doctors said I could not understand, that my brain was too broken for thought. They spoke about me like I was a wall. They tested me for what I couldn't do instead of what I could. I understood every word." A ripple passed through the crowd. Disbelief, curiosity, shame, awe, all blending together. Theo continued, his sentences slow but deliberate, each one hitting harder because of the space it demanded. "I screamed for help when my sister fell in the pool. No one came. They said I was making noise. The truth is, I was speaking the only way I could. A girl heard me because she listened with her heart before her ears. Her name is Lily." The spotlight shifted slightly. For a moment, Lily wanted to vanish into the floor, but Theo's eyes found her in the dim light and she felt steady again. "After that day," his voice went on, "people began to see me. They gave me tools to say what was already in my mind. I am not a miracle. I am proof that silence is not emptiness." By the time he finished, the auditorium was utterly still. The kind of silence that exists only between two worlds, the one that was and the one that's just been born. Then the applause came, starting as polite acknowledgement and swelling into something enormous, cathartic, unstoppable. The moderator opened the floor for questions. A gray-haired neurologist stood first, skepticism tightening his jaw. "Young man," he began, "in your case, how do we distinguish genuine cognition from trained response? From caregiver influence?" Theo's gaze didn't flicker. His fingers moved, and the voice replied, calm and cutting, "Ask me something no caregiver could prepare me for." The doctor hesitated. "Very well. What do you think happens to consciousness when communication is impossible?" Theo paused only briefly. "Consciousness," the voice said, "does not disappear when ignored. It waits, like light under a door." The audience erupted again, not in applause this time, but in the low, collective hum of minds rearranging themselves. Even the skeptical doctor sat down slowly, his expression unreadable. When the session ended, the applause rose like thunder. Reporters surged forward. Specialists crowded Dr. Sharma with questions. Elizabeth cried openly, no longer bothering to compose herself. Harrison stood frozen, hands trembling, until Lily touched his arm. "You can breathe now," she said, and he exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. That night, back at the hotel, the family gathered in the suite that overlooked the glittering harbor. Theo's wheelchair faced the window, and the reflection of the city lights danced across his face. Harrison poured a rare drink, voice thick with emotion. "All those years he was right there," he said softly. "Listening, understanding, watching us get everything wrong." Elizabeth's hand found his. "We can't change the past," she whispered, "but we can make sure no one else's child goes unheard." Lily sat cross-legged on the carpet again. As she had so many times before, her notebook opened to a fresh page. Theo typed, "We did it," she smiled. "No," she said. "You did. We both did," came the reply, and then another sentence slower, as if savoring the weight of it. "Now what?" The what came faster than any of them expected. By the next morning, clips from Theo's speech were spreading online. Short videos with captions like, "The boy who spoke after 6 years of silence and technology gives voice to the voiceless." News outlets reached out from every continent. Talk shows sent formal invitations. The family's phone lines were flooded with messages from parents begging for help, for guidance, for a miracle of their own. Harrison wanted to retreat, to protect Theo from the circus of public fascination, but Theo had other plans. "If we hide," his device said, "they will keep deciding for people like me." Dr. Sharma agreed. "The world needs to see that intelligence can exist outside our expectations," she told Harrison. Theo's visibility could reshape policy, funding, education. "This is bigger than one family." Elizabeth, torn between pride and fear, finally nodded. "Then we do it our way, carefully, on our terms." So they began the second campaign of Theo's life. not for survival, but for understanding. Interviews were granted selectively, filmed in quiet rooms rather than glossy studios. Theo insisted that Lily be by his side for every one of them, not as a handler or assistant but as a friend, a witness, a living reminder that the miracle had begun with empathy, not technology. The first interview was with a respected public television host, known for his calm intelligence and deep respect for human stories. The cameras rolled, lights softened, and Theo's voice filled living rooms across the country. "They said you were unreachable," the host asked gently. "What does it feel like now to be heard?" Theo took his time, then typed, "Like finally breathing after holding my breath for years." "And what would you tell other families who are where yours once was?" "Don't measure understanding by sound," the voice answered. "Measure it by eyes that follow you, by stillness that waits for meaning. Everyone is trying to speak. Most of us just need someone patient enough to listen." The episode went viral within days. Hashtags multiplied. Emails poured in from teachers, therapists, and strangers who simply wanted to say thank you. A foundation for alternative communication research named Theo their ambassador. Newspapers called him the boy who changed medicine. Harrison bristled at the dramatics but couldn't deny the impact. Lily, though proud, felt herself fading into the background of the story. The world saw Theo as a symbol, Dr. Sharma as a pioneer, Harrison and Elizabeth as repentant heroes. But no one asked about the gardener's daughter who had heard a scream and chosen to listen. She didn't mind at first. The work mattered more, yet some nights when she returned to the cottage they'd finally moved back into, she lay awake wondering if this was what it meant to grow, to give pieces of yourself to something greater until people forgot they were yours. Theo noticed before she said a word. One evening, while preparing notes for a university lecture Dr. Sharma had invited him to give remotely, he typed, "You're quieter lately." "I'm fine," she said, smiling. "Lie again," came instantly. "What's wrong?" She hesitated. "Nothing's wrong, sometimes I think the story doesn't belong to me anymore." Theo's gaze held hers. "You started it. That can't be undone." "I didn't do what you did. You did what no one else did," his device replied. "You heard me before I could speak. That is the hardest thing of all." Lily swallowed the lump in her throat. "You really think so?" "I know so," he typed. "And when I'm ready for the next thing, you'll be there too." She didn't ask what next meant not then, but she understood that Theo's world was expanding again. Beyond therapy, beyond interviews, toward something larger and far more uncertain. The certainty arrived in an email from a major news magazine. They wanted a cover story, not just an interview but a documentary-style feature titled, "The Voice Within." How a silent boy changed what science believes about intelligence. Dr. Sharma was thrilled. Harrison wary. Elizabeth cautiously optimistic. Theo read the proposal, then wrote, "If we do it, we tell everything, good and bad." And they did. The resulting article, published weeks later, was unlike any other. It didn't glamorize Theo as a miracle or pity him as a victim. It told the truth, about misdiagnosis, about privilege, about the gardener's daughter who refused to look away. The final paragraph quoted Theo directly. "There are many of me in the world. Some are still waiting for someone to hear their noise. If you are that someone, don't walk away." The story broke records. Donations to communication research tripled. Hospitals began implementing Theo protocols, new evaluation methods based on presumed competence. Universities invited Dr. Sharma to lecture, and in every room, every board meeting, every clinic, a single question began to echo. What if we've been wrong about all of them? Through it all, Lily remained by Theo's side, her own name now known but never spotlighted. Reporters described her as the voice beside the voice, which made her laugh and cringe in equal measure. But she stayed, not for recognition, but because there was still work to do, and because friendship, once born of shared silence, doesn't dissolve just because the world learns to listen. Late one night, after another long day of interviews and travel, she found Theo in his room, staring out at the city lights beyond the window. His tablet glowed faintly. "Tired?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "You?" "Never of this." She smiled, settling into the chair beside him. "You realize you've started a revolution, right?" Theo's reply came slowly, almost tenderly. "Revolution is just a louder way to listen." And in the quiet that followed, Lily felt something shift, not between them, but around them. The world outside the window was still vast, still broken, but now it was also paying attention. The day the world listened, winter rolled into the city with its heavy, silver breath, the kind of season that seemed to mute everything except the sound of determination. The Montgomery estate had changed since that first summer, when screams went unheard in its marble corridors. Now light-filled rooms that once felt cold, laughter moved freely through spaces that used to echo with restraint. And the garden, the same manicured masterpiece where a tragedy had almost unfolded, was alive with snow prints from Emily's boots and Jason's clumsy snowman attempts. But inside, behind a wide bay window that overlooked the frozen fountain, a different kind of preparation was underway. Theo's story had reached every corner of the world by now. His speeches were being studied in universities, his words quoted in classrooms, and his ideas discussed in medical ethics boards. What had begun as one child's rescue from silence had grown into a movement, a challenge to the world's understanding of intelligence, communication, and dignity. But Theo himself didn't care for fame. He was focused on something else entirely, his next message. He was writing, not for a journalist, not for a doctor, but for the people like him, the ones still waiting to be heard. He called it the Listening Manifesto. Every day, Lily came straight from school to help him refine it. They sat side by side at his desk, a quiet partnership forged in purpose and affection. She read his drafts aloud, and he adjusted sentences with surgical precision, each phrase carrying the weight of 1,000 unheard voices. "Why call it a manifesto?" she asked one afternoon, pencil tucked behind her ear as snow melted on her coat. Theo's device blinked. "Because the world likes loud words. But you're not loud." "No," he typed, "but my silence is." The response lingered in the air between them, profound and fragile. Lily nodded, jotting it down as if afraid the idea might slip away if left unwritten. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Sharma and Harrison worked tirelessly to prepare for the International Education Conference in New York, where Theo had been invited as the keynote speaker, the first nonverbal communicator ever to address that audience. The theme was redefining human potential, and all around the country anticipation grew. Journalists called it the day the world would listen, but success always attracts resistance. In the days leading up to the conference, a prominent medical journal published an op-ed questioning the legitimacy of Theo's communication, suggesting that subconscious influence from his caregivers might still be shaping his words. The author, an old colleague of Dr. Blackwell, the same doctor who had once dismissed Theo as hopeless, implied that the movement around Theo was more emotional than empirical. The article spread fast. Talk shows debated it. Online forums filled with arguments both defending and doubting him. Harrison was furious, Elizabeth wounded, and Dr. Sharma deeply concerned. "We can't let them turn this into spectacle," she said gravely during a meeting in the study. "Theo's message must stand on its own merit, not on our defenses." Theo, however, seemed unmoved. He listened to their worries, then typed, "They are afraid of what changes when I am real." Lily touched his arm. "Then show them, Theo. Show them you're more real than their entire system." He looked up at her, his eyes calm and knowing. "We will." The morning of the conference arrived with the pale clarity of destiny. The venue was grand, the Manhattan Civic Hall, its stone facade gleaming like a promise. Inside, thousands of educators, scientists, and policymakers filled the seats. Giant screens hung above the stage, ready to project Theo's every word to millions watching live around the world. Backstage, the team assembled for one last check. Dr. Sharma tested the eye-tracking system. Harrison reviewed the event's live feed, and Elizabeth whispered quiet prayers under her breath. Lily knelt beside Theo's chair, adjusting the small clip-on microphone near his tablet. "You ready?" she asked softly. Theo's answer came as a slow smile before he typed, "Always." But just as the stage lights dimmed and the announcer's voice echoed, "Please welcome, Mr. Theo Montgomery," a soft chime from the tablet broke the rhythm. The screen flickered once, twice, then went dark. The main device had failed. Panic swept through the team like a ripple through glass. "The connections dropped," Dr. Sharma said sharply. "Back up now." Jason scrambled for the secondary device, but the Wi-Fi signal was collapsing under the event's massive bandwidth. The clock was ticking. The crowd waited in perfect silence, the kind that swells with both reverence and impatience. Harrison's voice wavered. "We might need to reschedule." "No," Lily said suddenly, standing. Her eyes flashed with the stubborn certainty that had once defied an entire party of disbelievers. "Theo doesn't need their machines to speak." Before anyone could stop her, she wheeled Theo forward onto the stage. The applause that greeted them was hesitant, uncertain, but Lily ignored it. She reached into her bag and pulled out the old laminated communication board, the one they had made together months ago, with faded words and crooked pictures under the peeling contact paper. "This," she said into the microphone, her voice trembling but clear, "is where it started." She turned to Theo, holding up the board. "You still remember the symbols, right?" Theo met her gaze, and for a moment it was as if time reversed. Back to that first day by the window, that first line and dot, that first word. Slowly, deliberately, his finger lifted. He pointed at yes. The audience leaned forward, thousands of eyes straining to follow. Then he moved again, tapping image after image, slow but certain. Lily spoke each one aloud as he pointed, her voice becoming the conduit of his message. "Listen. Even when there's no sound." The sentence hung in the air like a living thing. Theo continued, the rhythm deliberate, unstoppable. "Every mind is speaking. Find the language." Lily's voice broke on the last word, but the applause came before she could cry. It started with one pair of hands, then another, then an avalanche of sound that shook the hall. Technicians rushed to restore the tablet, but by then it didn't matter. Theo had already won. When the device flickered back to life, he finished the message that would later be quoted in textbooks and speeches for decades. "I began as a noise people wanted to stop. Now I am a story people want to hear. But remember this, there are millions still unheard. Don't wait for technology to listen. Start with your heart." By the end of his speech, half the room was standing, the other half wiping their eyes. Lily stood beside him, trembling with pride. Dr. Sharma pressed her palms together in silent awe, and Harrison, overcome, wrapped his arms around Elizabeth as the crowd roared for their son. Outside, the cold evening burst into light. Reporters swarmed, microphones outstretched, cameras flashing, but Theo's calm presence cut through the chaos. When a journalist asked, "How does it feel to change the world?" his answer was simple. "I didn't change the world. I reminded it how to listen." Weeks later, as the first copies of the Listening Manifesto were published, the words spread like seeds in every language, every field, from hospitals to classrooms to courtrooms. Funding for inclusive education programs skyrocketed. Medical boards revised protocols. But more than policies, it was hearts that changed. Parents kneeling closer to their children, teachers pausing before assuming, doctors learning to wait instead of diagnose too soon. At the Montgomery estate, life returned to a quieter rhythm. Theo no longer needed interviews or conferences. He was content teaching online, mentoring children through assistive communication programs and writing essays that continued to challenge and inspire. Lily spent her evenings helping him manage his foundation's outreach program, The Quiet Revolution, which funded communication technology for underprivileged families. One snowy night, months after the conference, Lily and Theo sat by the window again. The garden outside was blanketed in white, the air filled with the hush that only falling snow can bring. Theo typed, "Do you ever miss before?" Lily smiled faintly. "Before what?" "Before the noise of the world found us." She thought about it. The quiet summers, the afternoons spent reading, the fragile secret that once belonged only to them. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember how many others are free now because of you. Because you were brave enough to speak." Theo's eyes softened. "Because you were brave enough to listen." They sat in silence after that. The kind that wasn't empty but full of memory, gratitude, and the unspoken truth that everything had begun with a single act of compassion. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. Somewhere far away, a child made a sound their parents finally paused to hear. And in that pause, in that heartbeat of attention, the world shifted again, just a little toward kindness. The noise that once went ignored had become a new language, one that belonged not to machines or miracles, but to every human heart willing to open itself to understanding. And so the story that began with a scream no one heard ended with a whisper that moved the world.